The one time that I said she was my parents' age, which was not very nice of me. But then yesterday, if you were listening to the show, you heard me get a little frustrated with all the clutter that's here in the studio. There's all kinds of, what does Mickey Ryan call it, Lucas? Ron Slay's
Zonedega.
Zonedega.
Or Zodega.
The Zodega. Ron Slay's Zone Bodega, because he's got all manner of snacks, drinks, cocoa butter lotion. I don't know if that's for him or for Ramon. There's all kinds of crap just littering the studio, and largely it's due to Ron Slay, whom, by the way, I love. So I took it upon myself to throw away some of the stuff that was in here yesterday, get it out of the way, relieve some of the clutter. It's too much for me, which is stupid because I've literally got all of the space that I need to spread out in the studio. But there's this Chick-fil-A barbecue sauce lunchbox that lives in here, and it sits at Slay and Ramon's, what do you want to call it? It's not quite a cubicle, station. It sits at their mic stand, whatever it is, because we all sit at the same console, but you know what I mean. So I threw it away because it was empty. I looked in there to make sure that there wasn't anything of value. Apparently, there's a note from, like, the owners of Chick-fil-A or some kind of Tennessee branch manager of Chick-fil-A. Because Slay, I did not know the backstory on this lunchbox. Chick-fil-A at one point in time took away barbecue sauce, which sounds like an egregious offense. So Ron Slay straight up wrote a letter to Chick-fil-A demanding that they bring back the barbecue sauce. So not only did they bring back the barbecue sauce, which every American can thank Ron Slay for the efforts, the strides that he took to make sure that we can all have our barbecue sauce with our spicy chicken sandwiches. They sent him a lunchbox full of Chick-fil-A barbecue sauce with a handwritten note, and this lunchbox on the outside says, #brought back the BBQ. This BBQ sauce lover's name is the Boom Boom Room Ron Slay.
Did you feel bad when you realized the sentimental value that the lunchbox holds?
Oh, sure. Of course. Like, I'm not a heartless, maybe. I would not have done that if I had known that there was sentimental value attached to the lunchbox. I want to make sure. Only Buck can make this the opening part of the show, says Slay. Slay's in the comments on YouTube. Good morning, buddy. Listen, this is as close to a public apology as you or anybody else is ever going to get from me, because I do feel bad. This is something that means something to Slay. It has sentimental value. And also, take it the hell home. Get it out of here. Because I threw it away. I threw it in the trash can. I got rid of the giant empty bottle of Fireball that was in here for no reason. And I threw out the lunchbox because I looked in there and there didn't appear to be anything of value. And I thought it was just like an empty case of barbecue sauce because Slay's got like 6 of them sitting in the mini fridge. I don't know who eats this much barbecue sauce, but apparently Ron Slay does. That's okay. We still love him. So now I am in a war against 3HL. I have been nominated as the Zone, at least the Zone. I don't know about local supervillain. I think there are more, and Super's probably a little dramatic, hyperbolic. I don't think I'm all that bad of a guy. I feel like probably some people agree with or disagree with me on that, but that's okay. Get him, Slay, says Justin Griffin on Facebook Live. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, okay? I threw out the lunchbox. I apologize to Slay. We move on, upward and onward. But I do have a DraftKings neon light that normally sits to my right in the studio, and he's done something with it.
He's retaliated.
Now, I think I'm going to walk out of the studio one day, and my car's going to be on what do you call them? The cement blocks. It's just going to be stripped down. Ron Slay's going to call some people up. They're going to come in here, strip down my 2012 Ford Soccer Mom, and run off with all of the parts that are still useful at this point.
Come at the king, you best not miss.
That's what I'm saying. Well, who's the king in this situation?
Well, clearly it's Slay, because you are afraid of his retaliation.
Am I?
You got your head on a swivel.
You think I'm afraid?
You're talking about walking out to the parking lot with your car and cement blocks.
That's mental preparation. That is not fear.
By the way, I'm looking at your DraftKings light-up thing.
Oh, it's in your studio.
No, it's not.
What do you mean?
It's in your studio.
What?
I'm looking at it.
I'm disoriented. I can't like move that far away.
Yeah,
from
I don't
the
want to tell you
microphone.
where it is because I want to see you look for it, but I'm literally looking at it.
I'll do it during the commercial break. Robert Doss says, just be glad you didn't touch his monkey. I mean, that's a whole different scenario. Now, Ron Slay has chimed in on YouTube and says, heavy is the head. No, Slay. I'm the only one of the zone. I don't want to call us talent because that sounds self-important, even though that's what it says on our paychecks. But I'm the only one of the zone on-air members that actually has a crown. I'll bring the crown in because heavy is the head that wears the crown. But it ain't Ron Slay wearing the crown, baby.
Slay's crown is a headband.
I've got an actual crown. It's sitting in my office at home. I will bring it, and I will wear it each and every day just so everybody else knows who's running this joint, at least between 10 and 1. 615-737-1045. All right, so that concludes the self-involved portion of the program today. If you're keeping track of this on-air feud that Lucas, you're involved in this. You know you're attached to me at this point. Like you have me and you have Blaine and Mickey, but at this point, if I go down, you're coming with me.
Yeah, but I'm in a weird spot because I did not support you throwing things away willy-nilly that weren't yours. I like the fact that Slay has set up his own little Zodega here.
Oh no, listen, it is not an objection to Slay's stuff in here. I mean, I don't keep stuff in here because it's a public space and I don't like that stuff. I don't like to do that. But I am not objecting to Slay's stuff. What I am objecting to is that it's strewn everywhere. It's all over the place. There's paper airplanes that have been flown. Apparently it was National Paper Airplane Day. He's just making them and throwing them around. I guess you can do that on a three-man show when you're not talking. I don't have that luxury, unfortunately for me. So there's paper airplanes all over the place. There's barbecue sauce-filled lunch boxes. There's empty bottles of booze. Like it literally looks like a bunch of teenagers came in here and had a party.
The omega-3 pills would do it for me. There's like trail mix, candy, barbecue sauce, and omega-3 pills.
I mean, listen, if you miss your omega-3 pill in the morning, you come into work and you take it at 3 p.m. when 3HL starts. Or I guess when Ramon fought, because I think they share some of the supplies.
Yeah, it's the same spot.
Ramon and Slay sit in the same seat. So I sit in the same seat as Jason and Brent. So my area, they have respected I will not say they have respected our collective area in this way, whereas the one directly to my left is a mess. This can't be tolerated. So it's not that I object to the stuff. It's that I object to the stuff all over the place. So I'm going to organize it. I won't touch anything that's not mine, but I'm going to bring in. You ever heard of these like these basket stores or whatever they're called? Like container stores. There's something literally called the Container Store, where it's just a warehouse full of different things that you can store all your crap. I'm going to go to the Container Store. I'm going to buy a bunch of containers so that we can at least organize the mess a little bit. And then I will allow everybody else to organize their items as they so choose, like cubbies. You can have a lot. I mean, I don't think we have like lockers here. I think there is like some little room off behind the bathroom that actually has lockers. I don't know if anybody actually uses the lockers. And there's no attempt in trying to get everybody to shuffle their stuff down the hall. But if I bring things physically into the studio so that people can organize themselves, then maybe we will avoid this conflict between 3HL, J. Martin Ramon, and myself. So far, Blaine and Mickey have avoided the smoke. I'm sure that listen, it's going to end up being me against all three of the other shows, and that's okay. That's how we like it. This is where we thrive. Ramon and I like our stuff spread out so we can view it. Slay's basically co-hosting the show today in here in the chat on YouTube, which we appreciate Ron Slay and his participation as always, as we do for all of you guys. It's hilarious. Eric Hike says it's hilarious. Buck thinks he has to allow something. No, listen, if you're me, this is the mindset that you got to have. This is the mentality.
Yeah, but you talk about going and getting containers or cubbies. Like, that's fine, other than just complaining about it and waiting for someone to do something about it.
Oh, yeah. No. Like, okay, so for example, and we're gonna get into the Julio Jones conversation. Mike Ginnitti is going to join us up next. I promise it's not going to keep. We're not going to bring you guys too much further into our work lives, okay? But in my neighborhood, in North Nashville, there is an inordinate amount of, like, litter, like trash that people just feel comfortable throwing on the street. So instead of complaining about the trash, Dara, my lovely girlfriend, bought me one of these I don't know what you call them, like claws. You know what I'm talking about? Like something with a trigger that you can pick up items without constantly bending over and hurting your back or whatever. So I buy 30-gallon trash bags. I go out for about an hour after the show finishes if the weather's nice, and I do a little community service. I pick up the trash that's in my neighborhood. I don't just complain about it. I do something about it. All right? This is at least for the amount of complaining that I do as a one-man show for 3 hours a day, I am prepared to take action. I am looking for solutions, but while I look for a solution, I'm going to complain about it.
Champion of the people, Buck Reising.
That's what they tell me. 615-737-1045. What we're going to get into next is something that the people want. I may not be the champion of the people, but Julio Jones, if he ends up a Tennessee Titan, will be the champion of the people. Mike Ginnitti, who runs Spotrac, the exceptional, I don't want to call it an aggregation site, but where you go to basically play armchair GM across all of sports. He will join us to discuss the financial implications for the Tennessee Titans of adding Julio Jones. That's what's coming up next. I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
We're on all your devices. 104.5 The Zone TV. Live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Periscope.
Score
humanly possible without overcomplicating things. And that's why we're looking forward to having him here in a second. But Joel Corey is a former agent. He works for CBS Sports now, does great work, both via podcast and articles that you can find at cbssports.com. He's been on this radio show, but most recently he was on J. Martin Ramon. And you can get that podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast, J. Martin Ramon. So they asked him, I think it was yesterday, basically what the Falcons' approach with Julio should be whilst working through the process of trading him. And here's what Joel Corey had to say.
Well, the first thing I'd have Julio do is make his wish list. Where would you want to go? And then I would go, okay, let's look at the cap situations and look at the personnel and see how realistic that is. The team which screams out to me is why we're having this conversation is the Titans. Okay. And then I look at the Patriots. I think that a lot of the moves they made this year is because a guy in Tampa who used to be there won a Super Bowl. So they went on an uncharacteristic spending spree. They have two tight ends, one who used to play in Tennessee, but they don't have a number one receiver. That team makes a whole lot of sense to me. The teams which can afford Julio from a cap standpoint and have a need, he would never want to play for because they were picking very high in the draft for a reason. And another team that I would suspect Julio would be interested in would be the San Francisco 49ers because he had two of his best years of his career when Kyle Shanahan was his offensive coordinator, who is now the 49ers head coach.
That's Joel Corey, former NFL agent, now doing work for CBS Sports, explaining why the Tennessee Titans basically sit atop the list of teams that are capable and are best equipped and would be in the best position for Julio and for the team to add the services of Julio Jones. So with that, we bring in Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac. At Spotrac is where you can follow him. Mike, we appreciate you taking some time. How are you this morning?
Doing well. Appreciate you.
So how many interviews have you done on Julio Jones and the finances across the country right now? Like, be honest with me.
Yeah, it's up to about a dozen now, and different answers every time, right? No.
I mean, honestly, because the situation. I mean, we understand that the team salary cap situations aren't changing dramatically, but the information seems to change almost on a daily basis at this point. So I wouldn't blame you at all if that was the case.
Yeah, the hot stoves are red hot right now, no question. But I think it's been consistently Tennessee at the top of this list, really all offseason, really dating back to like December when I put him on a bubble list and I was identifying teams that could need a legitimate second wide receiver even after the upcoming season. So I think it's real. I think Tennessee's real at the top of this list. It's not just Vegas kind of doing their due diligence here.
Well, and the information thus far out of Tennessee here in Nashville has been that they are interested, but at this point they're kind of sitting back and letting, essentially calling Atlanta's bluff on the first-round pick, allegedly, that is on the table for Julio Jones. But without getting too far down that rabbit hole, let's look at the finances of this specifically. The conversation here in Tennessee and why they have continued to be favored is because it's easier. The financial gymnastics are easier for them to be able to go through to add Julio Jones. Is it as simple as a Ryan Tannehill contract restructure to be able to create the cap space to add Julio Jones, Mike?
It sure is. Yeah, look, I know they don't have much to work with right now, and there's a couple of draft picks left to get done here, but you're talking, $1, $2, $3 million at the most to finish off this 90-man roster for the rest of the offseason, barring other additions or even extensions that could happen, and there's some out there on this roster. It's that easy. I mean, Tannehill holds the highest base salary in football right now. They haven't touched it. I agree with them not touching it because you don't want to put dead cap down the line if you don't need to, but this to me seems like a pretty good reason to do it. So it's as easy as converting him into, a minimum salary this year, converting the rest into a signing bonus, throwing some void years onto the back end of this deal so you can keep yourself in decent shape for next year as well and get the most out of Julio Jones over at least 2 years here.
That's music to Titans fans' ears because, of course, they've seen your tweet about that, and there was somebody else in this market that seemed to go back at that concept a little bit, but it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how these contracts are done and how restructures actually work that we've had to basically clarify because not all of us are experts in the salary cap math, as you yourself are. With the unwillingness to this point to do that restructure, Mike, this has been we've had John Robinson on this show. He's talked about basically the idea that it's a break glass in case of emergency financial option, that they want to keep some of their some of their, as much as they can of it whole without creating these future larger cap hits that would come from basically kicking the can down the road. How often is it a wise strategy, as you mentioned, you agree with how they've done it, kind of waiting to see how these things play out before they actually know whether they're going to be able to get Julio Jones? Do you think they're taking the right financial approach with this, basically waiting until there's more clarity on the situation?
When I started doing this, it's been about 12 years now, and when I've really been diving into this NFL stuff, I was 100% against the restructure. I understood teams that did it, but I thought there's got to be better ways to do this. There's got to be better future planning to get around this. I've really come around on that philosophy over the past couple of years, and the reason is that the salary cap continually went up $10 million every single year.
Right.
So the league was bailing you out and giving you the ability to make those moves almost as a built-in process. You know what I mean? Instead of putting a $30 million salary cap charge on your table any year, just keep pushing things down with the positions of importance. And there's nothing more important than the quarterback. So the question for John Robinson right now isn't should we restructure? It's how much faith do we have in Ryan Tannehill 3 years from now? We don't have to go farther than that. That's where his contract ends. So if you feel comfortable that he'll be here for 2 years, 3 years under this contract, then there's no reason why you shouldn't want to put $17 million of this contract into the next 3 years with void years to help yourself out, because the league's going to bail you out next year. We've already seen that cap ceiling come in. Even if it doesn't get that high, there's going to be significant help. And then 2023, all reports are saying record historic cap jump for the NFL. So I would feel completely comfortable right now at the quarterback position, moving money down the line to get a big time player in that roster right now.
Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac is here with us on 104.5 The Zone. We're talking about the financial implications of trading for Julio Jones for Tennessee. Let's look at the Falcons side of things, because right now, as they sit here, top 51 contracts being held against the cap prior to roster cutdown day. They have the second least amount of cap space available, not even enough to sign their rookie class at this point. I feel like the conversation around Atlanta, or at least around Julio Jones, is that the pressure is on the teams who would be bidding for their services. But, Mike, I feel like if you look at the opposite side of things, the pressure is absolutely on Atlanta because they can't get anything done financially until they get this dude off their books.
You nailed it. It's not being said enough. It's not being said enough about how much Atlanta really needs to make this move. And if they're not going to make the move, then they need to restructure Julio Jones because he's too expensive for them right now. The way to keep Julio and continue forward for the Falcons is either a big-time restructure for Julio, which I don't think they feel comfortable with, or a big-time extension restructure for Grady Jarrett, who to me is already an overpaid defensive tackle, a position where you really don't want to be overpaying. So those are not good answers if you're coming from Atlanta's side of it. So I do think a trade is imminent here because they need it financially speaking right now, because they've restructured their quarterback 4 times. So
yeah,
it's a catch-22. This is a player they probably want to have this year now to pair along with Ridley and Kyle Pitts. But yeah, their hand is forced. What's not forced is the timing. This doesn't have to happen in an hour. It can wait until August. It can wait until even week 1. There's no deadline to this June 1st policy now. The fact that we're past June 1st just means from a cap perspective, Atlanta can make this happen. So I agree with Tennessee waiting. I think you should be sitting on your hands right now and letting other teams kind of fall out of favor here because they will. If there's 5 teams in, it'll be down to 2 by August 1st.
Mike, I can't do another Jadeveon Clowney watch. I can't do it. It was it was necessary. It was a necessary evil in the middle of a non-sports global pandemic the last time around that we went through one of these things. But I can't do another training camp. 6 months or not 6 months, but 4 months of Julio Jones talk while the Titans sit back on their hands. It's going to drive me insane.
Yeah, but I think this one's worth it because I think you don't want to have to give up that first-round pick. That would be really damning to this franchise over the next couple of years. That there's going to be holes to fill. You don't want to give that up for this guy, in my opinion. He's a second-round pick and maybe a small player to go with it, or even a back-end pick if you want to throw that in as well. I think it's worth the wait till let the aggressive teams fall out and Tennessee get him right where they want him.
Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac is here with us on 104.5 The Zone. So to that end, Mike, because a lot of people look at first-round picks, they look at John Robinson's draft record, and they look at the hit rate or lack thereof of first-round picks, and they say, well, what's another first-round pick to the Tennessee Titans? They've already blown one on Isaiah Wilson. They took a gamble on 2 injured players in Jeffrey Simmons, who has panned out, and now this year Caleb Farley. Can you go into a little more detail about why a first-round pick for this franchise in particular would be so damning?
Well, you're going to be upping Ryan Tannehill's cap hits to start. Kevin Byard's getting more expensive every year. You can try to get out of that after this year if you have to. You got a Derrick Henry situation as well. And, there's some offensive line concerns in terms of how expensive that could get for you as well if you have to dive into free agency, which they certainly tried to do so this year. So, how much are you going to be spending in March come 2022 just to keep this thing afloat and remain contenders with a high-paid quarterback at that point? To me, that's why you need first-round picks when you're in win contention, because they can come in and they can fill immediate holes with $6 million cap hits. They can, that's just where it is. It's hard to draft in the 20s. There's no question about it. I give, those teams a lot of credit who can successfully hit on 25 plus, overall draft selections on an annual basis. But in my opinion, it's not so much, you got to hold on to these things because they're gold. It's this situation specifically. I don't think a 32-year-old Julio Jones with that contract, which might even need to be extended at some point, is worth a team giving up a first-round pick for. I think you should be able to give up less because you have to do more when he gets here.
There was a lot of conversation, Mike, about who it might end up costing the Tennessee Titans if they were to add a contract like Julio Jones, understanding that their first opportunity for an out would be after the 2022 season when his contract, the one that he's currently on, provided that they don't give him an extension or anything like that, if his contract stays status quo right now. They have A.J. Brown, who will be obviously due for an extension at some point in the near future. They've got Harold Landry, who's in a contract year. Rashaan Evans is in a contract year. Jeff Simmons, they have the ability to pick up a fifth-year option on him because he's a first-round pick. Is there a way, given the unprecedented salary cap rise that the league is getting ready to once again experience after we get through this COVID-stricken financial situation that the league is under heading into 2021, can they keep the bulk of this roster, these star players or highly paid players at important positions who they could explore extensions for? Is it going to cost them anybody if they add Julio Jones?
I don't think it has to. Not for this season. I think they've done enough to kind of look. They got good value in Brown. They got good value, and I think good value in Bud Dupree. Especially with how they structured that contract. I think the moves were smart. The cap implications are smart that they're being pushed down into 2023 for the most part with a lot of these contracts. Can you retain Derrick Henry next year? I don't know. That's probably one that has to fall off by the wayside, even though I love the player. But that
Mike, you're going to start a fire here. You know how people love him down here.
That was a 2-year contract, every day. That's just how those things are built. Yeah. So you're going to have to do something with it, whether it's an extension to restructure that cap hit or just have him move on altogether. But, that's a way you can certainly keep yourself afloat. I just read an unbelievable piece on The Athletic about the retention of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and how all 22 are coming back and how they did it in the void years. And certainly I was close to that this offseason as well. Winning will fix everything. If this team goes and wins, and if I'm not talking Super Bowl, I'm talking get themselves back up to AFC conference champion level.
Yeah,
you're going to be able to get a lot of these players back. Not so much team-friendly deals in terms of the overall value, but the structure. And that's all that matters. Can you keep the cap hits low in a current year to keep your window active? So if you can go out and win some ball games this year with this roster, then some of those names you mentioned who are going to be up for extensions will be willing to play ball, and that's really what matters right now.
Look at this. It's all coming up Titans in this conversation with Michael Ginnitti of Spotrac here on 104.5 The Zone. The June 1st, I don't want to call it a deadline, but the ability for teams to kind of split up the cap hits that they would have to eat if they traded a player prior to June 1st, now giving them a little more financial alleviation. Outside of Julio Jones and Aaron Rodgers, is there any situation that you're monitoring across the league right now that would also have these kind of post-June 1st financial implications for a team to be able to move a player?
Yeah, I think the Zach Ertz conversation is real. He's got a couple of void years on the back of this that Philadelphia would like to split up in terms of what he has this year versus going forward. They just can't afford to take on his dead cap hit all at once right now. So whether it's via trade or via an outright release, something's going to happen to Zach Ertz in the next couple of weeks. Outside of that, I think most of the damage has been done. I think you're going to see some player-for-player trades, which I've heard some rumblings about, which is super exciting. The NFL doesn't get enough of that, in my opinion.
Right.
But I do think there's some roster management that will happen here into July once camps open up and teams kind of figure it out. And certainly injuries play a factor in that as well. What happens with like a Gardner Minshew and a Nick Foles? Nick Foles is a big dead cap situation for Chicago right now. I'm not sure there's a team that needs him yet, but like I said, that's an injury situation to be monitoring. But most of the damage has been done. I think the Aaron Rodgers stuff has sort of worn away a little bit here, although certainly that would have to be after June 1st. So it's really Julio or bust right now in terms of the big names that could be moved with cap applications.
Things we love to see. Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac, of course, follow him at Spotrac on Twitter. The most comprehensive armchair GM website out there, making the people smarter about the finances of all of these professional leagues, not just the NFL. Mike, we always appreciate you coming on the show and giving us the information that we need.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
You as well. Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac. Ooh. Now, the Derrick Henry thing is probably going to ruffle a few feathers, but as he said, that's always been a 2-year contract. And so an extension is possible. It's not like they're going to move on from Derrick Henry after 2 years, but this Julio thing, it's becoming more real each and every minute, hour, day, hopefully not much longer than a week that it goes past, although it certainly feels like that at this point because, as he said, the Tennessee Titans would be wise to just sit on their hands, wait out the aggressive teams, and let Atlanta basically bid itself down.
I mean, they're the only team that's been included in every topic of discussion about Julio Jones, right? They're the most consistent factor in this conversation.
Do we think, and I'd be curious to know what the audience thinks about this, 615-737-1045, 615-737-1045. Julio Jones, because we talked about this, I think, a couple days ago, Lucas, the idea that if John Robinson trades for Julio Jones, this would be one of the most impactful, one of the most important, one of the most impressive transactions of his career. You kind of pushed back on me a little bit and said, well, it depends on what he gives up. Mike is saying you can't afford to give up a first-round pick, and I think that's the consensus thought around the league right now. But I don't know. I think the first-round pick conversation is obviously something that everybody is turning up their nose at. But is this enough to take what few detractors remain of John Robinson? I mean, I don't know how much more you can be pissed at this guy if he's putting you in the best position possible. Him and Vin Marino, the Titans resident capologist, cap wizard, who makes this kind of stuff possible. Even if you've been put in as perfect a position as possible to go out and get this dude, I don't know how people could still be pissed at John Robinson.
Yeah, it'd be fair to say if it happens, it'd be one of his more impressive transactions because he's not one to give up too much. Like, that's not one thing that we've ever really been able to say about John Robinson. In terms of draft capital and just trades in general, you can argue he paid Jadeveon Clowney too much money, hindsight's 2020 and all that, but he's never been one to give up too much. So if it did happen, then I could see the argument that it'd be among his top moves as the GM.
615-737-1045. You have thoughts, you have opinions. Now is the time to get in on the conversation about Julio Jones and the Titans. We will do so more on the other side. Coming up next, I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
You've heard that name times infinity the last few weeks, and it's still going on. Julio Watch.
I mean, if you can get a player like Julio Jones, yes.
That word rhymes with Julio.
Who's seriously the contenders for Julio Jones?
All anybody seems to want to talk about?
I said Julio.
Mas Julio.
Like the Julio Jones thing is going on so long. We keep following the story wherever he signs. And if he becomes a Titan, you'll learn all about it here. Julio, get the stretch. All day, every day, here on your home for the Titans. 104.5 The Zone.
Lebowski because somebody has accused me in the comments, Lucas, of being the Stephen A. Smith of 104.5. And, every once in a while, Lucas and I will chime in on the comments. If you want to interact with us there on Zone TV, we can do that. During the commercial breaks, at least. And I said, Stephen A. makes like $11 million a year. Sign me up, baby. And then Lebowski has just put in the YouTube comment section, who was on crack? Can we find that Stephen A. sound talking about Lamar Odom? It makes me so happy to hear every time, because the audience, the radio audience is probably listening like, what the hell are you talking about? No, this is audio that you absolutely must hear. So while Lucas looks for that, we'll talk more about the Julio Jones situation. I've also got some stuff on the USFL making a return. But first, we go to Ben in Maryland, who has called in on the Julio situation. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Buck. How you doing, man?
I'm doing just fine, brother.
Good deal, man. So here's the thing about this first-round pick. People seem to be upset about giving up a first for Julio, but if you're making the move anyway, the expectation is you're going to be picking at the end of the first round anyway, right? So, why not give up the first and have Atlanta send you back a third? And you know what I mean? It can kind of work out because I think there is a first out there, and I think Tennessee might be – I think that's why they're in all these reports, man. I think they might be offering up the first round for this year or for next year. Just in the hopes that they'll get picks back from Atlanta. Just want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, Ben, I appreciate the call. If you guys want to jump in, 615-737-1045. So Ben is saying that he thinks that Tennessee has a first-round pick on the table. I can tell you definitively, I'll report it here. I can report it anywhere else. The Tennessee Titans do not have a first-round pick on the table for Julio Jones. That is something that I'm comfortable putting out there. It's not them. I don't know if anybody else has, but just in doing my due diligence on this particular situation, the Tennessee Titans do not have a first-round pick on the table for Julio Jones. So let me just push back on that with that information, Ben. But here's kind of he's thinking the same way that I am, though, because a first-round pick for the Titans, assuming that everything doesn't go to hell and Ryan Tannehill doesn't have a career-ending injury, or not a career-ending, but a season-ending injury, or something horrible doesn't happen to Derrick Henry, which of course we hope that nothing happens to anybody, any of these guys, no matter what team that they play for, that would be detrimental to their long-term sustainability as professional athletes. That's of course a risk that you run anytime you play football, but you know what I'm saying. If everything doesn't go to hell, they'll probably still be picking in the 20s again. So you're talking about I would equate to a higher second-round pick if you're talking about where the Titans would be selecting, even without Julio Jones. Because I think, given what the division looks like, you're still probably going to be in the mix. If you find your way into the almost postseason conversation, given with the expanded postseason, the additional wild card game, an expanded 17-game regular season, you're still in a pretty solid position to be able to compete for your division right now. So that's kind of my thought process. The only place that I disagreed with Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac, and Reed Barker has said, I've pronounced it 6 different ways every time I've tried to say it. I'm trying. I don't know. I should probably ask Mike because he's the founder of the website. Mike, how the hell do you say this? Spotrac? Drives me crazy. But anyway. So for my purposes, I'm looking at a Titans second-round pick as basically a third-round pick. And I'm looking at a Titans first-round pick, which, by the way, they do not have on the table. I'm looking at a Titans first-round pick as a second-round pick. So I'm not that bent out of shape if they were to push their offer up to a first. It would not bother me in that kind of way. Now, I understand that there's a significant difference in terms of perception for a first-round pick and a second-round pick. But we talked about this all throughout the course of the draft. The hit rate on first-round picks, especially where the Titans have been selecting in the last, 5 years? At this point, maybe 4, because obviously they had the first overall pick in 2016, and then they traded away for Jack Conklin, still a top 10 pick, but you know what I'm saying. I don't get all caught up in the first-round pick. If you want to give a first-round pick for Julio Jones, do it. It's not going to bother me any. That's why when Lucas says, it depends on what John Robinson gives up for Julio will affect your decision or will affect your thinking on the deal. I mean, unless it's like a bunch of them, unless it's like 3 first-round picks and a player, like, I'm not that bothered by it. Now, if you do like a first or a second or a first or a third or a first and really anything else, yeah, then you're probably going to look at it a little skeptically. But this is the thing, and not like Jadeveon Clowney. This is a proven player, an all-pro caliber wide receiver who may not still, I should say, be at the height of his powers, but nobody is going to do a film study on Julio Jones through the 9 games that he played last year and the seasons prior to that and say this isn't a top caliber, top quality, top of the league type player. So I'm good with it. 615-737-1045. What we're going to talk about coming up next is we're going to get into the conversation about Shane Bowen, the Titans defensive coordinator. Officially, now in title and name and everything. He spoke to the media yesterday, as did Todd Downing. So we'll start with Shane Bowen and the pressure that's on him. The question that I want to know from you guys, 615-737-1045, what are you most skeptical about when it comes to Shane Bowen as the Titans DC? What are you most skeptical about with this man now that he has the title? You're going to hear from him here in a second. We'll get into it on the other side. My thoughts, your thoughts, everybody's thoughts. I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Get Jason Martin and Ramon Foster on J. Mart and Ramon. Tomorrow morning from 6 to 10 on 104.5 The Zone.
incident on Wednesday, is how the report reads. Metro Police charged Antonio Andrews, the former running back out of Western Kentucky, with aggravated stalking, vandalism over $1,000, violation of an ex parte protective order, and harassment. What's ex parte, Lucas? Can you look that up for me? I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering that, too.
I don't know what that phrase means. The arrest of Andrews comes after he met a woman for drinks and dinner on Wednesday. According to the affidavit, the woman brought Andrews back to his apartment. I imagine that should say that Andrews brought the woman back to his apartment, but I don't know that. In the 1500 block of Demumbrian Street, Andrews asked the woman to see her phone, the affidavit stated. After not giving him the phone, the affidavit said that Andrews bit her nose. What? Causing her to drop it. Andrews ran off into the parking garage. However, he was unable to get into the phone, the affidavit said. This sounds like one of those bath salts reports out of Florida. Antonio Andrews okay? I hope the woman that is, he's charged with assaulting is okay. To bite her on the nose to see her phone. This is like what they say to keep, not a real dog training method, but to bite a dog on the ear to keep it from biting you. What is he doing biting women on the nose? You shouldn't be putting hands on a woman or teeth on a woman either way, I guess. But this doesn't sound. You can't make this stuff up.
He's one of those players that's associated with pretty much the worst time in Titans history.
He was their starting running back for a hot second when I got here.
2015, Ken Wisenhunt. Yep, he carried the load for a while there. Season.
My first season, my first year living in Nashville. Antonio Andrews was the starting running back. Oh,
he's only 28.
He's a little older than me if he's 28. I don't know when exactly his birthday is, but this sounds like a bath salts report that you see out of Florida where some dude is trying to eat another person's face.
Yeah, and according to Rhett Bryan, the location on Demumbrian is right there.
It's literally behind us.
A stone's throw from where we are now.
Yeah. No, it's the I don't want to give out the apartment building because that seems reckless, but if people know where the Zone studio is, that we're right around Demumbrian, and there's an apartment building between us and basically 10 roof and that whole stretch of Demumbrian bars. We're literally, I don't know, maybe 200 feet from where the nose biter resides. Goodness. 615-737-1045. So let's talk about Shane Bowen and the conversation that we had with him before former NFL linebacker Takeo Spikes joins us. That's coming up next, so stick around. But we had both Todd Downing, new Titans offensive coordinator, and Shane Bowen via Zoom yesterday. We wrapped up the show basically with, I think 5 minutes is all we could squeeze in on the live radio show of Bowen and his press conference. And there were a couple different things that people wanted to address with Shane, obviously, because this is the first time we've talked to him since he got his promotion. And the place that I wanted to start when I talked or when I got the opportunity to ask a question is basically the amount of trust that Mike Vrabel must have in this dude. And if you want to chime in with where you think, what are you most skeptical about with Shane Bowen, 615-737-1045. I see some people have called in. We'll get to your phone calls momentarily. But what I wanted to know is, I don't know, Lucas, is my question in there or should I repeat the question for the people to hear? Okay, my question is not in there. So basically I asked Shane, your promotion was not a popular move by this organization after how poorly things went on defense. This was Shane Bowen's response.
Yeah, I think he's kind of coached me in this deal. He's brought me up through this profession in some regard. I think just looking back at the position groups when I had them, OLB-wise, some of the things we've done in the past here, even last year, some of the good, some of the bad, there was stuff, obviously, we got to get corrected. But, I appreciate his confidence in me. Again, just like all these players we talk about every day, we work every single day to prove ourselves and to make this team better. Regardless of the individual, whoever it is, we're all in this together to do whatever we see fit or whatever's needed to find ways to win games in whatever fashion we got to do. We got to play better defensively. We do. I'm excited. I'm encouraged about where this thing's going right now. But again, I'm just like everybody else, man. I'm putting in the work day in and day out, trying to do everything I can to help this team win.
That's Shane Bowen when I asked him yesterday, what's it say about the faith that Mike Vrabel has in you to promote you, despite how poorly the defense performed last year? Across the board, basically, outside of turnover differential. It was a bad defense. It was a historically bad defense. And I want to know how you guys feel about what you heard from Shane Bowen yesterday, because I didn't, most people are going into this with preconceived notions about Bowen. You're going into this expecting to not be happy with the promotion, to not be happy with the performance last year, and to not expect him to be able to improve much. But I'd be curious to hear your conversation. You'll hear more from Shane Bowen here in just a second. But first, let's go to George in Cookeville, who's called in. He wants to talk about Shane Bowen and the interaction, or the basically how he's going to work with Mike Vrabel. Go ahead, George.
Good. Thank you for taking my call. This is stating the obvious, and y'all covered this before. My question, and I love Vrabel. Okay, he's the right guy, I think, for head coach. But it's a classic business management deal. He was a defensive coordinator, played defense. Can he delegate? You always hire people smarter than you, I think, if you're the CEO.
Without question. It's something that I think, because we'll get into this more later in the show, okay? You guys are probably going to be pissed at me when I say this, but I think Shane Bowen's getting a bit of a raw deal. And it kind of goes into what George is thinking, which, by the way, we asked Bowen about yesterday, because now he's not just working under Mike Vrabel. He's working under Jim Schwartz as well. Corey Curtis of News 2 asked him basically how you get your footprint or your stamp on a defense where you're working between two alphas among alphas in the professional football world. Shane Bowen's got to find a way to navigate this thing. And now he's saying, he understands. Well, I'll let Shane Bowen speak for himself.
It's been good. The beauty, obviously, Mike's done it. Schwartz has done it at a high level for a long time and has been successful. Hazlitt has done it for a long time. It's great to be able to bounce ideas off each other. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, just finding or talking through, figuring out different ways to do things that doesn't totally wholesale everything we're doing. But, hey, it might be better if this player does it this way, or we're looking at it this way based on our personnel. Like, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, like I said, and just a different perspective. I think also, like, obviously with Braves and Schwartz and even those guys have a little bit of the offensive perspective, right? Because they were head coaches. They've sat in those meetings. They've heard those things. So gaining that perspective has been huge. Just kind of piecing this thing together and figuring out how we can attack offenses and kind of what they're looking for.
Shane Bowen speaking with the media yesterday while we were in our Zoom press conference with him. It really is a difficult dynamic that he's going to have to navigate. And what I'm seeing in the chat, like from John Michael J on Twitch, man, he doesn't sound sharp. People were telling me they didn't like his body language. They didn't like the fact that he wasn't making eye contact with the Zoom camera when I asked him about him being an unpopular hire/promotion at this point coming off of last year. I'm not going to do body language analysis in a Zoom, okay? I understand why people are going to be hypercritical, hyper-focused on that. But the only thing that I can judge him on is what the answers that he gives us, the ways that I observe his interactions with the players at practice, even if what we get to see is a limited sample size. By the way, hopefully this rain holds off and I'll be able to go to OTAs today to see how they're progressing, how many more guys are out there. I'd just like to be able to experience practice in that way and kind of continue to give you guys a more well-rounded picture of who this dude is. And then ultimately we're going to judge him based on his unit's performance on the field. But people are already starting the chatter of saying, Vrabel brought Jim Schwartz in here to be a break glass in case of emergency guy. If the defense goes to hell under Bowen, at least you've got Jim Schwartz in there who has time, not only with this organization, a decade with the Tennessee Titans, but time as a defensive coordinator, time as a head coach, several stops around the NFL, a very, very reputable career that Jim Schwartz has had. He's your guy if Shane Bowen fails. I don't necessarily think that's the case. Vrabel likes Bowen. And as the caller previously, I believe it was George in Cookville, brought up, this is the classic business management course that Vrabel is putting Bowen through as somebody who has brought him up through the coaching ranks from, I believe they were together at Ohio State, then together with the Houston Texans, now with the Tennessee Titans, and Vrabel is advancing Bowen's career throughout the course of this. But I'll tell you what I'm skeptical of here in just a second. Let's first go to Chad in Hendersonville, who wants to weigh in on this subject. Go ahead, Chad.
Hey, good stuff today. The Julio trade, when you look at a wide receiver at his age, 32 years old, and you look at the history of the league and the history of the drop-off of a wide receiver, I mean, when Randy Moss was 30 years old, the Patriots were able to get him for a fourth-round pick. He was actually traded 3 years later to the Vikings for a third-round pick. I don't think there's been a wide receiver in the history of the NFL post-30, let alone 32 years old, that's worth a first-round pick. It just has never happened. The drop-off of Julio Jones, what are you going to get a 32-year-old? What's best-case scenario? 2 years, 3 years? Is that worth a first-round pick, worth trading a potential 22-year-old rookie contract? It's just a no-brainer. You can't give a first-round pick. I mean, a general manager would laugh at a first-round pick, in my opinion.
Chad, completely diverting the conversation, although we appreciate the call. 615-737-1045 is how you jump in on the conversation. I get what you're saying, but if you're Atlanta, you traded Mohamed Sanu to the Patriots for a second. So, of course, you're going to go into the expectation with a first-round pick for Julio Jones, given what you did, what you were able to get from New England. And Bill Belichick has made bad decisions when it comes to wide receivers. It's really the place that you can be most critical of him as the greatest football coach of all time. We will come back. I see Mark. I almost read that wrong there on the call screen earlier. It made me scared there for a second because you didn't. I think his name is Mark, but that's not what you wrote in the call screen. Anyway, we'll come back. We'll get to Mark's call because he wants to talk about the Titans. We're also going to be joined by former NFL linebacker Takeo Spikes, and we'll get into the defensive conversation with him as well. That's what's coming up next. I'm Buck Reising. This 104.5 The Zone.
You've heard that name times infinity the last few weeks, and it's still going on. Julio Watch.
I mean, if you can get a player like Julio Jones, yes.
That word rhymes with Julio.
Who's seriously the contenders for Julio Jones?
All anybody seems to want to talk about?
I said Julio.
Mas Julio.
Like the Julio Jones thing is going on so long. We keep following the story wherever he signs. And if he becomes a Titan, you'll learn all about it here. Julio, get the stretch. All day, every day, here on your home for the Titans. 104.5 The Zone.
We're just trying to get through the Julio Jones watch. The conversation continues. All the people want to talk about is Julio. So we thought we'd break it up with a former NFL linebacker. We appreciate you spending some time with us.
No problem at all. Let's talk some ball, baby. Let's talk it.
Yeah, no doubt. So I want to talk with the podcast first, if you don't mind, to start there, because I listened to the Darius Leonard interview. Of course, Darius Leonard of the Indianapolis Colts, which is going to cause Titans fans to stiffen up a little bit based on his relationship with them. But a very interesting conversation. He's such a fascinating character. I've actually had a back and forth on him on Twitter before, because apparently he reads all of his mentions. He name searches himself after games, which I cannot imagine is healthy, Takeo, but they call him the maniac for a reason. What was your intention heading into that interview? I know you've done several, but this was the latest that I've had the opportunity to listen to.
Yeah, the intention was to go behind the mask with Darius Leonard, to see why people look at him as the maniac. And I think you pretty much summed it up. It's crazy to believe an NFL player would look at the mentions on Twitter, and he wakes up looking forward to see what people are saying from a negative side and to see what they're saying from a positive side. And my question to him, just giving all of the listeners at the moment a little glimpse into what we talked about in our conversation, was why? Like, why do you do that? Because most players can't handle that from the mental side. And his response was, in everything that I do, Spikes, I compete. I like to look at when people say I was the worst draft pick that the Colts had the year when I was drafted, going back to 2018. I like to look at people say, well, they picked a guy from an HBCU. That motivates me. I like to understand and know I came out in the same draft class as Roquan Smith, as Fred Warner. And now these guys are about to be up going into their fourth year, and you look at the body of work, and hey, I was surprised to see his body of work compared to the other linebackers who was drafted before him is way better. His accolades are better. All-Pro, Pro Bowl. Now he's up for a contract extension, him and also Fred Warner from the San Francisco 49ers. So expect those two guys to break the bank. But that's what motivates him, Buck. That's what motivates him. He likes for people to say what he can't do or what his team can't do, and best believe he's walking in the next day with the chip on his shoulder trying to prove them wrong.
It's why the Behind the Mask podcast is so worth your time, because there are so many podcasts available out there for people to consume, Takeo. I think we oftentimes get lost in the shuffle with just how much content is available to us, but to have these conversations between a former NFL player like yourself and a guy like Darius Leonard, who for the most part, fans look on the field, they see the number. If they have any closer association with these players, it's because they've used them on Madden or something like that. Like the relationship never becomes as personal as it does through a conversation. I know you've had several former and current NFL athletes, and it's not just restricted to athletes on the podcast, but I value so much in, at least from my standpoint, as somebody who works in the media, I'm never going to be able to have a conversation with, for example, just in that same draft class, a first-round pick here in Tennessee, Rashaan Evans. I'm never going to be able to have that kind of personal conversation with Rashaan. So when we talk about the marketplace being flooded when it comes to podcasts, there are so many different things that guys like you in your position can provide important perspective to the conversations that we're having about these athletes and the people in our lives when it comes to sports.
Oh, yeah, and Buck, I think the best way to explain it is this. It's so much information to consume, right? And we know where to get it. We know where to get that information. You can go straight to the internet. The internet can give you so much information. But what the internet can't give you is the why. The internet can't give you the details unless if somebody gives you the why to go search for the details. And that's the way that I look at Behind the Mask podcast. We sit down with not only athletes, we sit down with celebrities. We sit down with all people of status, and we understand everybody has a mask. And let's pull back the mask and become vulnerable and really have a conversation as if you and I are sitting down talking in the locker room and as if no one is listening. And that's the beautiful part, is this stage was created to give people an opportunity to be the author of their own autobiography.
Do you find Takeo Spikes here with us on 104.5 The Zone, the host of the Behind the Mask podcast, former NFL linebacker? Do you find, or have you found through any of your interview subjects, that some of them have been unwilling at first or a little bit hesitant to be able to disclose that kind of information? Because I feel, at least in this business, being on this side of a microphone, I feel like people are almost always willing to tell their own stories, because so rarely do they get the opportunity to tell their own stories. But have you found anybody who's been hesitant to kind of let you in, understanding that the environment that you've created with the podcast tends to be a little more relaxed and comfortable in that way?
No, we've been fortunate. And that's the beautiful thing that I really appreciate with what I'm doing with Behind the Mask is creating that platform to where guys and ladies can come in and become vulnerable. But I think a lot of it has to do with what really separates my podcast away from everybody else is, one, I played the game. Two, I'm a person of status. Three, I've taken not only one step in your shoes, but several steps in your shoes. So I have a great idea or inclination as far as what you're going through or what you've been through. Therefore, they know I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize your story. I come from the same humble beginnings. I know what it's like to be able to go through adversity. And so I think with them knowing that, they understand and say, you know what, this is a safe place. This is a vulnerable place to where I know I can control my own messaging. And at the end of the day, that's all we want to do.
No question. I know that because my producer Lucas had asked for some subjects to talk with you about, and I know this one is a little, it's not in the list of questions that I had prepared, but given that we're going down this path, have you followed at all closely the Naomi Osaka situation at the French Open? Because this interaction between media and athletes I find to be so interesting. And before I ask you a question, I guess I should ask, if given that I have not prepared for you for this prior, is that something that you followed at all, Takeo?
Yeah. I follow. I'm pretty well aware of what's going on with that situation.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm. I do.
So from that standpoint, given I'm a Tennessee Titans reporter, I do the talk show as well. But as a reporter, a local reporter, I struggle with the Naomi Osaka situation, because on the one hand, I'm looking at somebody who is 23 years old, who is saying that the amount of attention, the amount of scrutiny that she is under on the world's biggest stage when it comes to women's tennis is not helping her when it comes to her mental health. And I want so badly to respect that. In fact, I do very much respect that. But also as a local reporter, I understand that I don't work for a big media network. So this is going to be my only opportunity, if I'm one of these reporters in this press conference, to be able to interact and to get information from an athlete of this kind of stature. From your perspective as somebody who is now doing media but comes from the world of professional athletics, where do you kind of fall on this line that people have been trying to put Naomi Osaka behind, basically saying, I understand that you are dealing with mental health issues, but also you've made $55 million last year in endorsements. You should be able to speak to the media. I'm struggling to figure out how to parse it, Takeo.
Yeah, and I think that's what it all boils down to. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because when you look at her making over $50+ million in endorsements, we, not just as Americans, but we as a society, global, we think just because you're getting paid or compensated that you're owned. And I think what Naomi came out to say and really show that listen, at the end of the day, I'm me. 3 years ago, I beat Serena Williams. And as much joy as she had when I was looking at that, she was sad. She felt bad. Remember, she was crying in her press conference. And when I heard her make that statement, it clearly led off to me that, like, she was disturbed. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with it. Listen, I'll be the first one to tell you, like, money doesn't solve every problem. It really doesn't. And this goes into the box of mental health. Now, what I will tell you, too, is money will solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
but to answer your point and nail down on it is, I would love to have a conversation with Naomi. I would love to, and to really uncover what she really hasn't had a chance to talk about because she's not talking. I respect her decision because at the end of the day, when she's not playing tennis anymore, the same people, including you and I, who have a problem with her not talking, like, she has to live the rest of her life. She will have more life to live. And so mental health is way more important than making money. Mental health is way more important than giving a story. I think a lot of people have a lot of issues with that simply because of the money factor, what she's accomplished in the short time period that she came onto the tennis scene. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I respect her decision. And as far as what I read, she's not saying she won't ever talk again. I think it's more so of, I need to get through this period to make sure that I'm mentally stable in order to come back and talk about it. And that's what we have to be able to accept, regardless if we like it or not.
Which is so difficult for, I guess, to try to make people understand, at least, that there are so many different layers to this. There's so much nuance that comes into this conversation because I feel like people are looking at Naomi Osaka. They know what she makes, and they're saying, well, I'd take her bank account to go talk to the media, toughen up in that circumstance, something that I'm sure you or your teammates during your life as a professional football player in college as well have dealt with. Me being on the media side of things, I try to be understanding, certainly, of the things that I don't know that these athletes who we get to interview or who we have the opportunity to talk to are going through. It's such a difficult subject matter for people on our side of things to kind of parse and make sense to the audience, but I appreciate you providing some of your perspective to that. When it comes to life after professional sports, Takeo, you have found your purpose in this podcast. You have written a book about life behind the mask, basically, which is something that so rarely people have the opportunity to consume. Why specifically did you choose this route, and how was it difficult at all to kind of find that purpose outside of football? I know many athletes struggle with that.
Well, many athletes do struggle with it. And I think of, we had Dr. Nyaka Nilamti. She's the vice president of mental health awareness in the National Football League. She's conducting a mental health awareness she did for the month of May. And it had a bunch of active guys on it. So I bring this up because you just made me remember something that we had a conversation on the podcast, and I encourage everybody to go and listen to that episode. But me finding my purpose, I never knew what that was. And even when I first got to Cincinnati, going back to 1998, 1999, I was approached with doing a radio show. Now, I was all for it because I was operating up under the assumption that we were going to win more games. Guess what? We went 2-14 that year. So every Monday when I had to go talk, I hated it. And so when we talk about mental health, like, I was dreading it. I used to break out in sweats. But it wasn't until after week 6 I realized, after doing that radio show, riding back home in the limo, I realized that was my purpose. I realized that was therapeutic for me to be able to talk about what just had happened in a 24-hour time period, and it allowed me to move on and bury that bad baggage behind. And so when we talk about finding your purpose with a lot of NFL guys, it's very hard. It's very hard, and I'm fortunate to be one of the ones that I realized that at a young age, and I continue to hone in on my craft. And that's what really got me to this point to where I am today. You talked about my photography coffee table book, Behind the Mask. Volume 1 was dedicated to linebackers, and I went around for 2 years. I wrote the book, and I also did all of the photography in it, and I really shared their stories, some of the greatest backers that played the game, of how did they become great despite all of their trials and tribulations. And what made it so good was I picked a guy out of every decade, starting from the 50s all the way up into modern day. And so I'm very blessed to be in the position that I am. I was able to recognize that at an early age, and now that's what I continue to do to pursue that.
He is Takeo Spikes, former NFL linebacker, now media entrepreneur extraordinaire. Go check out the Behind the Mask podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review. Takeo, I honestly, I wanted to have you on to talk ball, but maybe we can do it another time because I think this has been a much more informed conversation. And I appreciate you being willing to give us some of your insights today on the show.
Oh, absolutely. And just hit me. I'll be back on soon.
No doubt about it. Takeo Spikes, kind enough to give us some of his time on 104.5 The Zone. I really enjoy talking to athletes, former athletes, current athletes about their kind of purpose, because we did go into that interview intending to talk about, the Titans, the defense. He played during the same era as Mike Vrabel, his insights on that. But so rarely do we have the opportunity to talk to people who have been in both spaces as professional athletes, now in the media. So we'll bring Takeo back another time to talk about football. But in the meantime, some of you guys have waited patiently on the phone lines to talk about football. We will do that coming up next. More stuff on the Tennessee Titans as I get ready to head out to OTAs later today. If you have questions, 615-737-1045. I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Want more fun from J. Mart and Ramon? Yes, that also means the pettiness. Hang out with Jason and Ramon whenever you want. Subscribe to J. Mart and Ramon wherever you get your podcasts.
Anyway, 615-737-1045. Mark has been waiting patiently. He's called in from Dixon. He wants to talk about the Titans. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, Buck. I think one thing that no one talks about is the kicker, and no one talks about it until they miss kicks. And once they do, like last year, it's the only thing anybody talks about for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
And I just don't hear anybody talking about our kicking situation. I know we have McCann, but I just don't know if he's up for a whole entire season. And the one question that I think no one is asking is if McCann farts or not. So thanks, Buck. I'll hang up and listen.
He said what? If McCann farts or not? Am I repeating something I shouldn't be saying? Is that like one of these what's the fake Adam Schefter's Twitter account? I don't think I could say that on the air.
Did we just get trolled?
I don't know.
I don't know, because it was a good
He waited 30 minutes on the phone lines to get that one off. So
it was a good discussion point.
No, it's a totally relevant discussion point. I don't know if we don't get the joke, McCann farts or not. I mean, I'd assume. I can ask him. What just happened there? The call. It's not the best part of this job because there are many great benefits of having my own radio show. But the callers are certainly like top 3 reasons I love doing this so much. Mostly because you guys are all over the place. Literally 30 minutes that guy waited on the phone line to talk about the kickers and then make a fart joke. I respect it. 615-737-1045. So the kicker situation, if I'm going to address his question seriously, Blake, I want to say it's pronounced Haubeil from Ohio State. He's an undrafted rookie free agent. He is on their roster. I was not terribly impressed with the knuckleballs that he was kicking at rookie minicamp, but this has been several weeks, so maybe he's had time to improve. And then there's Tucker McCann, who spent last year on practice squad IR, so we have no idea what he's capable of. You have 2 kickers, and honestly, if I'm gonna take this question seriously, I think that's the one thing outside of the difficult decisions that Mike Vrabel sometimes makes in game that every once in a while that go very poorly for them, and then we're immediately hypercritical of them because we're professional second guessers, and that's what we do. I do think that the biggest accusation that you could lob at Mike is that he doesn't take the kicking that seriously. Now, his public comments would not indicate that they don't take the kickers seriously, but their action, I can only go off what your actions tell me. They cycle through kickers, and the explanation is, well, we go off the kicks that they make at practice, which is fair. Like, I don't know how else you would judge a kicker. I don't know how closely Vrabel is monitoring the situation. I know that they have a special teams coach who has come under a fair amount of scrutiny in Craig Aukerman. And I think Craig Aukerman he can only work with the parts and the pieces that he's given to ultimately put together a successful special teams unit. Yeah, I mean, kicker, how many games? I don't want to do how many games did the kicker cost them last year, because I think that's parsing and doing the criticism, the analysis in retrospect. I think that's a flawed way to do it. But Stephen Gostkowski is still out there. I don't know if anybody has pursued him at this point. I know that he was considering retirement last year when he moved to Franklin, Tennessee, so maybe that's still on the table. But right now you're working with 2 unproven dudes. And for as many kickers as they've cycled through since the Ryan Suckup issues began, now Ryan Suckup sitting in Tampa Bay as a Super Bowl champion on a new contract, they have not given enough credence to how costly kickers can be. I think Gostkowski bailed them out in a big way last year because obviously he's a good player. He has had an incredibly successful NFL career across 15 years. Last year was his 15th season, I believe. 15th or 14th. Regardless, he's been one of the most accurate kickers in the history of the sport. Last year obviously brought him down a couple pegs. But after that, or before that, when they were kind of rotating guys after Suckup, whether it was Cody Parkey, who left the team for reasons that I really never got a good explanation for, but he didn't seem interested in coming back to Tennessee and then was given other opportunities elsewhere and did okay. You have seen several kickers come and go in Tennessee and really without much seriousness given to the position. Make the kicks or don't make the kicks. If you don't make the kicks, we're going to move on. I wish in the way that I provide solutions to the clutter in the studio or the litter in my neighborhood where I'm saying I'm not just going to complain about it, I'm going to go out and do something about it. I don't know what you do necessarily about the kicker. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what solutions I can provide outside of, well, what they're telling me is that they're watching who makes the kicks in practice and who doesn't, and the one that makes the kicks they roll with. I don't know how you fix that. You know what I'm saying?
I might have a solution, too, on the does Tucker McCann fart thing.
Oh, do you?
Yeah,
has somebody provided
Ed just called in to provide some context. He said maybe it's showing his age, but apparently, allegedly, it is a phrase used to say whether or not somebody feels pressure or not. Because if you feel pressure and you tense up and you can't fart, that's what Ed said. But if you don't, then it's not a problem.
What?
So I think by saying we need to finding out if Tucker McCann farts or not is how he handles pressure.
That's honestly
news to me.
Exceptional analysis, though. I think everybody can.
This is Ed gave me a very diligent explanation. He didn't want to be on the air. He just wanted the facts out there.
How did we get to this place where flatulence is now a part of the analysis that we're doing on the kickers?
So I don't think Mark was trolling us. I think he was simply asking.
I think he was straight up asking. He waited 30 minutes to ask me whether the kicker farts or not, and that's how. I hate that word, by the way. I hate the word fart. It's so grotesque. It's so harsh. Passes gas is preferable. 615-737-1045 if you would like to provide gas context to our kicker analysis. I can't get over that. How does that happen? It means stinks sucks, says Carrie Benford. I'd bring back Stevie G, says Pat on Twitter. I mean, listen, if Gostkowski is out there, you're playing a finances game at that point. Stephen Gostkowski, Lucas, if you could look up for me his contract on Spotrac, what he made last year, because I think it was a little north of $3 million, which is probably more than there. If you're talking about expenses that you're willing to spend on special teams, you already have an expensive punter, so you're looking to save where you can, or at least I would imagine that's the case. Now, we talked about the restructure with Michael Ginnitti of Spotrac. Spotrac. I don't know.
Gostkowski made just under $3 million.
Just under $3 million.
Yeah.
But still, a decent chunk of change for special teams when you're already paying a lot of money to the punter. Well worth it, by the way, for Brett Kern. I'm not out here trying to diminish the value of Brett Kern. I'm just saying if you're paying one more than the average player at his position, you're probably going to look in this season to skirt it where else you can. Now, I think that the field goal kicker has the ability, I don't want to say has the ability to affect the game more because obviously Brett Kern is straight up a weapon. So you don't want to take that away from him. But we'll spend some more time. What we'll get back into coming up next is Shane Bowen, because people are going to get pissed at me for saying this. I think Shane Bowen's catching a bad rap. And then we'll get into the Todd Downing conversation as well on the other side. I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
More Titans talk than anyone else. What a catch! Your home for Titans football and the flagship of Titans radio. 104.5 The Zone.
Okay. If you want to get in on the conversation, 615-737-1045. Like Pat on Twitter, he said, Bowen had the worst defense last year, Buck. Tell me we ain't having a pity party for him. 3rd and 24, converted. Third down. One of the worst feelings for Titans fans. And I don't want to call it funny from my perspective, but like it got to the point last year on 3rd down, 3rd and long specifically, where I'm looking for like different gifts to illustrate how futile the Titans defense was on those 3rd downs. It became a little bit of a game for me. But here's what I'll say, because we talked with Shane Bowen yesterday. You heard a little bit from the Titans defensive coordinator, and I asked him, I want to bring this audio back, Lucas, if we can. I asked him why Mike Vrabel, or what it says about Mike Vrabel, that Vrabel gave him a promotion from just a play caller and an outside linebackers coach to officially defensive coordinator this year. And the kind of solidarity that it shows from his head coach, his friend, his longtime coworker, because they've been in several stops together. This was what Shane Bowen had to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's kind of coached me in this deal. He's brought me up through this profession in some regard. I think just looking back at the position groups when I had them, OLB wise, some of the things we've done in the past here, even last year, some of the good, some of the bad, there was stuff obviously we got to get corrected. But I appreciate his confidence in me. Again, just like all these players we talk about every day, like we work every single day to prove ourselves and to make this team better. Like regardless of the individual, whoever it is, like we're all in this together to do whatever we see fit or whatever's needed to find ways to win games in whatever fashion we got to do. We got to play better defensively. We do. I'm excited. I'm encouraged about where this thing's going right now. But again, I'm just like everybody else, man. I'm putting in the work day in and day out, trying to do everything I can to help this team win.
That was Shane Bowen yesterday with the assembled Titans media, talking about the faith that Mike Vrabel has in him to be able to promote him to defensive coordinator. Now, why I think Shane Bowen gets a bad rap is going to play in line with something else that he said. Now, I don't want this to sound like I'm excusing the Titans' performance on defense. If you guys, I know you guys are new to me on the zone, but some of you have been with me for a while. I've covered the Titans now this will be heading into my 5th season, covering Tennessee on a full-time basis as a Titans reporter. The Zone Talk Show is new, but I've been doing this for a while. So I've experienced every year of Mike Vrabel and as a result, every year of Shane Bowen, and enough to know that when things go badly, I really do think coaches get too much of the blame. When things go well, I think coaches get too much credit. I think that this is a sweeping statement. I'm not absolving either of them, Vrabel or Bowen, of responsibility for how awful things looked last year. But I do think that the criticism is so much easier to put a face to with a coach than to really dive into what's going wrong there. The coach can have some hand in the failings. He can also have, or she, in the case of the Titans coaching and scouting staff, he or she can have a hand in the success as well. I don't want to dismiss it entirely that way. But when I look at Shane Bowen, what he said yesterday at the beginning of the press conference kind of compounds this for me, kind of backs up my point, because we're all critical of Shane Bowen because we were of the understanding, we were of the impression that it was entirely Shane Bowen's defense last year. Why were we under this impression? Because Mike Vrabel told us so. But what Bowen had to say yesterday about being the final voice of this Titans defense now, having complete control over the unit, really shed a little more light on this in a way that I don't think people were anticipating.
Yeah, it's been good. It's changed. It's definitely changed. Just the position, the title, the stuff that comes with it, having control over the whole unit. my perspective on everything, making sure we're all on the same page, seeing things the same way, and ultimately being the final voice, right? So it has changed in that regard. It's been great. The players have been great. We're doing a lot of new things, a lot of different things, just in how we go about our day, how we go about our business, and then obviously schematically some things change as we go with all the new personnel and everything else. So it's been good up to this point.
So he's got the final say. He's the final voice. Now, he has control over the entire unit. Well, why was that different last year based on the information? And listen, Mike, talking about Vrabel, I think Vrabel just got to the point with the defensive coordinator questions where he wanted to move on from it. Shane's defense, Shane runs the meeting, Shane coordinates the defense, Shane makes the call, on it goes. So I think it became a little bit flippant at the end. But you can't afford to be when we are going to pick and parse at every word that you say. Like, in this position, at least from my perspective, where I talk between the radio show, the primetime show, and the podcast once a week that I do, I talk for about 5 hours a day to myself. Sometimes I say things that I probably should be more focused on the way that I'm presenting them, the way that I am saying them, and it gets away from me in a way that if I go back and listen to it, my meaning that in my head, I thought I was communicating clearly, did not necessarily get across. So I'm understanding of things like that. But when the biggest issue for this football team last year was defense, communication on defense, sacks on defense, third down conversions allowed on defense, you have to be buttoned up on the communication that you're relaying to us as the media to then parse through for the fans. It's really the only, honestly, and I hate this because I am in the media, it's the only purpose that the media serves anymore. They don't need us anymore. The athletes, hell, Mike Vrabel on his personal Twitter account has a much bigger platform than me. Mike Vrabel has the ability to get his message out however he wants it through team-controlled media in a way that probably reaches a larger percentage of Titans fans than I do, despite being on the Titans radio network. But there is still an element of objective media that, one, you're speaking to the fans when you speak to us, and two, you're not going to get the varnished, in the case of the Titans-centric or the Titans' best story. We're going to try and parse this thing through objectively. Mike's got to know last year when he's telling us that it's Shane's responsibility that we are going to take him at his word. When Shane tells us yesterday that the job has changed considerably in that he's the final voice, that makes me think that he was set up intentionally or unintentionally to be the fall guy. You know what I'm saying? He was put in this position, and it snowballed in a way to where the entirety of the Titans fan base and largely the media are looking at Shane Bowen and saying, this is your job, this is your unit, fix it, damn it. When it sounds like there were a lot more cooks in the kitchen than the Titans coaching staff, Vrabel, Bowen, players, everybody, were willing to let on. That's why I think Shane Bowen gets a bad rap. We'll talk about Todd Downing, coming up next, because Lucas and I did a little bit of research into Todd Downing's recent history as an offensive coordinator and why you should be looking at it as a Titans fan. That is what's coming up next. I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
You've heard that name times infinity the last few weeks, and it's still going on. Julio
movies and who their favorite Disney characters are or whatever, I always liked the bad guys in the Disney movies when I was a kid. I loved Jafar. I loved Ursula and the Little Mermaid. I loved all of the bad guys. Cruella de Vil. These are my people. These are people that I can relate with. I can sympathize with because I recognize the behavior. But it does put me in a bad position, not because I can't handle the heat that comes with it, but I'm playing in this celebrity softball game tonight for the Nashville Sounds. Now, many people have said, "You're a celebrity?" I didn't know. It's just what the game is called. This is not me calling myself a celebrity. This is just the nature of the game. Okay, but I'm in the game with like a lot of actual celebrities, which is exciting because I've never met Terry Bradshaw. He's going to be a part of the game, Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, I haven't seen the complete rosters yet, but it is so if you guys want to go, you can buy tickets, by the way. This is going to be tonight at 6:30. I can't stay for the entire game, which I don't know how they're going to utilize me that way because I got to leave like after an hour. I got A to Z Sports primetime.
Just be like a pinch hitter a couple times and then dip out.
I could do that.
What position would you want to play if you're there for the whole game?
Right field. Get me as far away from the play as possible. Because like there's actual professional athletes out there, like current professional athletes. Because I know that Terry Bradshaw is going to be out there because it's put on by his Bradshaw Bourbon. It's tonight at First Horizon Park. You can get tickets now at milb.com/Nashville. It's called the Sounds Folds of Honor Rock and Jock Celebrity Softball Game. It's a little clunky, but that's all right. So I'm going to be out there tonight. So it's Terry Bradshaw, A.J. Brown, Taylor Lewan, Will Compton, which I'm certain Will Compton is waiting for me to screw up athletically, given that my job is to criticize not solely my job to criticize professional athletes, but we do spend a fair amount of time doing it. And then as soon as I look wildly unathletic out there amongst the professional athletes, it's going to be a bad deal. I know Jelly Roll's going to be there. I know that Deshaun Kaiser, future Titans backup quarterback, going to be out there. A handful of country music singers, Riley Green, Luke Pell, Russell Dickerson, Walker Hayes, Chris Lane, Lacey Cavalier, and then comedian Jeff Dye. I don't think that's the entire roster, but I'm definitely like the crap. If you're going to consider this a celebrity softball game, then I'm by far and away the crappiest celebrity out there. Like, no, these people are going to look around. You know, maybe a handful of them know some of the country singers, given that we are in Music City, given the strength of the music industry, and then they're going to get to me in the lineup and be like, who the hell is that guy?
So Bradshaw's probably the biggest, like, A-lister, right?
Oh, by far and away.
Yeah.
By far and away. Terry Bradshaw is a number one. Then you probably go A.J. Brown. Based on social media following, you go Jelly Roll after that because he's got a bigger social media following than Taylor. Musicians always have massive Instagram social media followings. I don't know how much is real and how much is I don't know how much is real and how much is, juiced up a little bit because once you get it, anyway, I don't want to criticize anybody for having fake followers. That's not fair for me to do because they all have blue check marks and I don't. I'm going to get one. But Robert Doss says, you sound like you're about to curl your mustache. I mean, I can curl my mustache if I want to play an actual bad guy. But we like to see it. The celebrity, Elijah says, the celebrities invited Buck? ? Yeah. I'm going to be the ball boy. The water boy. Run around with the Gatorade, which is fine because like I said, I could only stay for an hour, so I don't think they're going to actually put me out on the field if I can't full-time participate in the game. But Pat on Twitter says, I think you and Will Compton are tied for the crappiest of celebrities. Unfortunately, as much criticism as I bring on Will Compton, he's got a little higher of a profile than me. But it's okay. We're gaining on him. So if you want to come out to First Horizon tonight, tickets are on sale. Right now you can go to, here's the website, www.tennessee.foldsofhonor.org. That's how you get a ticket. I know my friends and family are going to be there to watch me embarrass myself athletically, so hopefully I don't completely shame, bring dishonor to my family. So speaking of dishonoring things, which is probably not a fair transition I should make, but what Titans fans, or at least based on my interactions with them on social media here on the radio show, what Titans fans are thinking or are concerned about when it comes to the opposite side of the ball, because we spent a lot of time on Shane Bowen today. But what Titans fans are concerned about is somebody bringing dishonor to Arthur Smith's offense, the prolific offense that the Tennessee Titans have had over the course of the last couple years. For me, and here's something that I think, people know how good the Titans offense has been, but I feel like people forget just how good. So I want to provide some important context to that, courtesy of CBS Sports. Since 2019, this is the NFL on CBS. Since 2019, the Titans lead the NFL in these offensive categories, which is going to shock you. Touchdowns. They're tops in the last 2 seasons. Not Kansas City, not Baltimore, not, I guess it would be the Tampa. I mean, it wouldn't be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because Brady just got there. Not the Packers with MVP Aaron Rodgers. They have 110 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. They lead the league in the last 2 years in plays of 50-plus yards, 23 total. Those aren't just explosive plays. Those are doubling up, more than doubling up, what is considered an explosive play, an X play, as they like to call them. They're better than anybody in football when it comes to red zone touchdown percentage, 75.2%. Rushing touchdowns, shout out Derrick Henry, and really Ryan Tannehill, who's been very, very successful with his legs. They have more rushing touchdowns than anybody in the NFL, 47. Tennessee's offense has been booming. So now you look at Todd Downing, because this is all, of course, under Arthur Smith, 2019, 2020. This was his offense. Why he's now the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. So then you look at Todd Downing, whose history as an offensive coordinator is brief. 1 year, the 2017 Raiders. They went 6-10 that year. Now, Derek Carr, the quarterback, made the Pro Bowl. This was a year removed from them going 12-4. Then the whole staff got fired. They were going to, regardless of what the record was, how bad or good the offense looked, they were all getting fired anyway because not Mark Davis. Mark Davis, the owner of the now Vegas Raiders, fell in love with John Gruden and paid him $100 million, which is obscene for all the good it's done them. But 6-10 their record. They were 4-3 in one-score games, so it's not like they were coming out on the side of bad luck in one-score games. They were about break even. 2 4-game losing streaks. Lucas did some good research on this while we were in the green room before the show this morning. 2 4-game losing streaks, one after they started 2-0 and then a 4-game losing streak to end their regular season. Half of those, so in 4 of the 8 games that they experienced those losing streaks, they only scored 10 points with Todd Downing at the helm. 5 of their 10 losses that season, they scored 10 points or less. So, that's not to say that there can't be growth from Todd Downing. He's been in several different spots since then. He is coming into an offense that I would argue is more talented than the Raiders that he had that year. I'm looking at Todd Downing though, and I'm listening. He's only going to say so much in when it comes to media availability, because we spoke to him yesterday. But the thing that kind of stuck out to me when it comes to Todd Downing is what he had to say about putting his stamp on the offense. This was the new Titans offensive coordinator yesterday with us via Zoom.
I think there's some tweaks and adjustments that go on in a system even when the coordinator doesn't change. And I think that's a natural progression at this point in the offseason, to take a look in February and even in March at what we did last year, and maybe some things schematically that we want to adjust, or you have some changes in personnel, and so you lean a little further away from one thing or a little closer to another. And so I'm not as caught up in putting Todd Downing's stamp on the offense as I am coming up with what the right recipe for the ingredients we have is, and making sure that we're as competitive and consistent as we can be.
So it was Todd Downing speaking to the media yesterday. If you want to weigh in on the Titans offensive coordinator, what you heard yesterday, if you did not hear some of this yesterday, we'll play a few sound bites from it for you. 615-737-1045. What are you most focused on when it comes to Todd Downing? That'd be the question that I ask you guys, because it's going to be about point production. It's going to be about how they continue to produce in the red zone where they have been so strong. And most importantly, I think to the fan base, is how they handle Derrick Henry. Now, he went on to say yesterday that his job gets a lot easier, gets substantially easier, given that the running back for the Titans is Derrick Henry. He said it himself. Your job is a lot easier knowing that you have 22 in the backfield. But I'm looking at a handful of things. Now, what he also said was that he's not looking to be Arthur Smith. He is, and this is an important mindset, because what you just heard there, it might sound like generalities to you. It might sound like coaching cliches, but it is so critical given what we know of old school football coaches, certainly the last regime here in Tennessee, Mike Mularkey and Terry Robisky and Dick LeBeau, where your mindset as a coach coming in is that we have schemes, we know what the schemes are, we know what the plays are, we have been doing this for several years in several different spots. We will make the players fit in our schemes. We will run our offense and expect the players to be able to run our offense, even if it doesn't necessarily work to their greatest strengths. Now, that wasn't something that was said out loud, but that is how they did their business. It's ultimately why Mike Mularkey played a decent role and why Mularkey was fired, because he didn't want to adapt. He didn't feel it necessary to have Terry Robisky adapt. They just were going to run it back again. And this was going to be who the Tennessee Titans were until John Robinson said, no, thank you. We will move on. We will find somebody else who can help us maximize our offense, our quarterback, the roster that I've put together, because I think it's worth more. Turns out he was right. So what I'm curious to know from you guys, what do you focus most on when it comes to Todd Downing? 615-737-1045. What he said there is comforting. Now, it's more a standard line at this point where he's saying we're going to find the right mix for the ingredients that we have on the roster. We're going to find ways to maximize the players that we have, which is important because Pat asks Pat says on Twitter, he's most focused on how much Downing takes from Arthur Smith's successful offense. If I was Todd Downing, and he said this yesterday basically, and I'm saying it in a different way. He was not as strident as I'm about to be. But if I'm Todd Downing, I'm saying, okay, Art had a lot of things that worked for the players that he had, but the players are now different. There is no Corey Davis. There is no Adam Humphries. There is no Jonnu Smith, Michael Pruitt. There is excuse me. That's so unprofessional of me to just cough into the microphone. I'm pissed at myself, Lucas. That should be a fine. I'm going to go donate to Home Street Home right now, which you can do, by the way. Every time I screw up, or if you just want to make a donation to a good cause, on the website right now, 1045thezone /Buck Reising, you can make a donation to Home Street Home. So I'm going to go pay a fine because I coughed into the microphone, and that's disgusting. Anyway, I don't want Todd Downing to be Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith did what was best for the Tennessee Titans in 2020 and 2019, why their offense was so productive. I want Todd Downing to take what works from Arthur and try and apply it to the players that he has now, but the players are different. So Todd Downing's offense is going to be different.
He doesn't have the luxuries Arthur Smith had, at least not right now.
Well, we don't know that, right? We don't know what Julio Jones is going to be. We really don't know what Josh Reynolds is. We don't know how good or bad Taylor Lewan might be coming off an injury. Again, ACLs are routine. Buck's Adderall medication says on Twitch, which always makes me laugh because I do need it to be able to keep things on track here on the radio show. But Buck's Adderall medication says on Twitch, I'd love to see more of a screen game with Evans. Well, you'd like to see more Evans in general. He played, I'll look this up. In fact, Lucas, if you could look this up for me on Pro Football Reference, how many games Evans actually played in?
5.
5? You know that to be so?
Yeah, we talked about this last week a little bit.
Okay. 5 games for Darrington Evans. I don't think he had more than 10 carries in those 5 games, and he did not play all. I mean, you're obviously not going to play. You're not going to start all 5 of those games because you're
14 carries, 54 yards.
Okay, so he was over.
And then the 1 receiving touchdown.
Okay, which was at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, frankly, Buck's Adderall medication is saying I'd like to see more of a screen game with Evans. You'd like to see more of a screen game with Derrick Henry. You'd like to see more of a screen game in general. And I attribute part of that to the off season, how jacked up it was. Because there was this whole conversation about if you're going to be a screen team, then you're going to have to commit to practicing screens in your practice time. Consider that there was no off season for them to really no off season for them to be able to practice screens. Their practice time was limited as it was, given the interruptions that COVID caused, given the guys that were available, and you saw a lesser amount of screens than you've seen in years past from the Tennessee Titans. Jeff Fisher has a line about this, about why they weren't a screen team, because of how much time you would have to devote to the screens, the execution of them, the practice of them in your practice time. So I would love to see that. Running backs out of the backfield, catching passes, is something that Todd Downing's offenses do well. Football and Other F Words had a really good write-up on this. At F Words Pod is where you can follow them, about just how much more Todd Downing, or at least in his previous iteration as the Raiders offensive coordinator, how much more he utilized running backs out of the backfield, which bodes well for Darrington Evans. Also, where does Darrington Evans factor in the receiving game? Again, we don't know this. MB on YouTube says, Buck, weren't fans pretty questionable about Arthur in his first year? Oh, hell yes. Arthur Smith we were talking about Vrabel losing his job. We were talking about Arthur being a failure. As early, and I say we, I was not calling for the jobs of Mike Vrabel and Arthur Smith at that time. I thought that was not yet warranted criticism, but it was bad. And listen, Marcus Mariota, a big issue in that. But in 2019, when Marcus was still working through the issues that he was having coming off the 18 season, Arthur Smith had not yet figured out the best utilization of the players that he had on the roster. Part of that was a hindrance at quarterback. Nobody is going to deny that Marcus Mariota, or at least I don't think people are going to deny that Marcus Mariota was a hindrance. We've seen how much better those numbers include how bad that first 6 games were. Those numbers that I cited from CBS Sports include the 2019 season, where they looked dead in the water in that Broncos game when they finally benched Mariota for Tannehill. They were leading in the last 2 seasons, 19 and 20, leading the league in touchdowns, leading the league in plays of 50-plus yards, leading the league in red zone touchdown percentage, leading the league in rushing touchdowns, all with Marcus Mariota starting the first 6 games of that season. It's a wonder. So Arthur Smith figures it out in the second half of the Carolina Panthers game. Tannehill makes his first start against was it at the time San Diego? I don't know. I don't remember if they were Los Angeles Chargers or San Diego Chargers yet. I'm pretty sure they were still San Diego. Or maybe they were playing in that soccer stadium still at that point. It doesn't matter.
Well, that was in Nashville.
It was in Nashville, but I'm just trying to, for the sake of being accurate, Lucas. They had the almost overtime game against the Chargers. Melvin Ingram fumbles on the goal line. The Titans defense recovers. Ball game. Tannehill's first win as a Titan. That was after the Broncos game. Then they go, I believe, the next week to Carolina. And the whole first half is a Dion Lewis game plan, which was, and by the way, it was working at the time. Then Dion Lewis had a fumble. Things started to spiral. The offense couldn't keep up. They lost that game. I can't remember the name. He's now a Washington football team player. Anyway, like Kyle Allen, they lost that game too. But in the second half of that game, Arthur Smith figured out how to use Derrick Henry, and then they started on the roll that they were on. Arthur Smith was under heavy fire up until that point. And then everything changed. So are there going to be growing pains for Todd Downing? Yeah, sure. He's working with a whole new group. Not a whole new group, but a fair amount of new skill position players. He's going to have a more normal offseason, which is important for we'll call him a first-year coordinator, even if he's had the position of coordinator before. He's familiar with the players on the roster. He's intimately familiar with the weakest position on the offense right now, which is tight end, his former position group. Where he makes his changes, it's going to be tendencies, play call tendencies, And it's going to have to be adjusted based on the guys that they do, or more importantly, do not have. Whether that group includes Julio Jones at this point remains to be seen. We don't know. But he's got high expectation. The expectation is that he's going to try and recreate what Arthur Smith did. Don't go into this season thinking that. You're setting yourself up for failure if you do. And if they get anywhere close to the same kind of production that Arthur and that offense were producing, you're going to be so happy. You're going to be thrilled. You're going to be pleasantly surprised. They can win games and also not be as prolific an offense as they have been over the last 2 years. Would you like that? Of course. Would Julio Jones change that? Without question, assuming he's healthy. But don't put so much pressure on yourselves as fans holding Todd Downing to the expectation of Arthur Smith. He's going to have to perform. His unit is going to have to perform. But to say, okay, Arthur's gone, Todd needs to be the next Arthur, it's not fair what you're putting Todd Downing. I mixed up I said Todd Downing. It's Todd Downing. This is how I know I need to get off the air. So we'll do that. We'll get me out of here. We'll do the polls coming up next, and then I'm going to have to sprint to Titans practice. Hopefully the rain's holding off, and we don't get excluded because they move things inside of the bubble. Poll questions. Lucas Panzico will recap them. That's on the horizon. Or rather, it's coming up next. I'm Buck Reising. This is 104.5 The Zone.
Getting you set for Titans training camp. Bam! Your home for Titans football and the flagship of Titans radio. 104.5 The Zone.